Can this laser pay for itself? At one point, one job with a major hotel line looked like it just might. So today I'm using the xTool P3 on real paying jobs to see what it can actually earn. Big thanks to xTool for making this video possible, and an even bigger thanks to you all for supporting this channel, because without you, none of this would be possible in the first place. For this challenge, I'm counting on the full setup. I'm using the xTool P3 80-watt CO2 laser, the mobile metal base, and the automatic conveyor feeder. That puts the total at $7,497. And to keep this honest, I'm only counting real paid jobs. Real money collected, real expenses, no made up numbers, no hypothetical sales, just real work. Now, some of you may remember I used to run Chad's Custom Creations more like a you dream it, I build it kind of business. And that was fun. But over time, it got overwhelming. So now with Engravings to You, I think a lot more about systems, repeatable products, batching materials, reducing hands-on time. Because if a machine is going to make money, your process matters just as much as the machine. The first paid job I used the P3 for was a set of custom QR code signs for a hotel chain associated with Hilton. They needed 15 signs. Each one had a different QR code for a different room, and they also wanted acrylic stands to go with them. I charged $40 per sign and $5 per stand. So this order would come out to $675. And from a business standpoint, I like jobs like this. The product is simple, it looks clean, it solves a real need. And once the process is dialed in, it doesn't require a crazy amount of labor. For material, I use a 24 by 24 inch, half-inch red oak plywood. I order it right off of the Home Depot website. Once it arrives, I then prep it in batches ahead of time. I sand it with 120 grit sandpaper. I spray it with a clear satin lacquer, and then I let it dry for 15 minutes. Then I buff it with brown shipping paper so it feels nice and smooth. That also gives the paper masking tape a great surface to stick to. Then I apply the masking, roll it down tight, and now that board is ready to go. That's a big part of how I try to run my business now. I want material ready to go before the order even comes in. That way I can move fast. The client sent me all 15 QR codes, pulled their logo off their website, I built up the design, worked that into it too. I sent over the proof, it got approved, and then it was time to start making them. Because these panels are 24 by 24, I had to use the pass-through on the P3. I do wish the machine had a little bit more depth on the inside of the bed, but I was still able to make it work. And later on in this video, the P3 is actually the only machine that could handle one of the biggest jobs I've ever got. Now, since this was my first time running these on the P3, I only sent one first, and that's something I'd strongly recommend. Even if you feel good about your settings, test one first. That first sign took 22 minutes and 30 seconds. The cut was just a little short in a few pieces, so I trimmed those from the backside with a razor blade. So then I slowed the cut speed down a little bit for the next run. Once that was dialed in, I was ready to batch them all out. And this is where the cameras really helped out. I was able to line up the next pieces around the space that had already been cut out, and that helped to maximize the sheet. If I do this right, I can get 9 of these 8-inch signs out of one 24-inch panel. To make that happen, I shrink the shape down by about 1/8 of an inch, and that gets my wood cost for each one down to just about $1.20 per piece. I sent the next batch, and honestly, I think I could still optimize the engraving more. You can see it jumping around from element to element, and that made it take 1 hour and 27 minutes to do these 5. While working on other things inside the workshop, I had it engrave and cut out the other 10. Then I moved out to the woodshed for finishing. I used Rust-Oleum's dark gray primer. I lay the signs out in a grid. I hit the edges first. Then I focus on the engraved areas on the face. You do have to be careful not to overdo the paint, because it can still bleed into the wood grain. After about 30 minutes while the paint is still a little bit soft, that's my favorite time to pill the masking. For some reason, it just comes up easier at this time. I pill the bigger parts up by hand first, then I use a razor blade to lift the rest. I also have this giant razor blade that I got at jimmyduresta.com. You can get them on his website there, and I've gotten a ton of use out of this tool. It seems ridiculous, but it's extremely handy to have in a workshop like this. Once all the masking is off, then I sand the fronts and the backs with 120 grit until everything looks clean. Then I blow everything off with some compressed air. If any paint gets down into the grain, I'll scratch that out with a small blade. I'll lay them all back out again, this time at an angle, and I spray them with lacquer. After about 15 minutes, I can flip them over to the other side and spray that side. Another 15 minutes, come back and I do a second coat on the top. Again, I'll take the brown shipping paper and buff the finish out to give it a nice, smooth texture. For the acrylic stands, I used the P3 to cut out around 70 of them. And yes, I do have that file available on my store if you want it. You can find that at chadscustomcreations.com. I'm about to go inside and have lunch. I am not going to leave this out here unattended, so I'm going to pause it. All right, I am back from lunch. Now it is safe to start it back up. Something that I really do like about this is once we take this out, it all falls into this nice removable tray on the bottom side. Dump it out. And bring this right back to the laser. The worst part with these is definitely peeling off the masking, which you can see I only leave that on the back side to protect the acrylic. But the kids actually love coming in and helping with this and making a few bucks. Once everything was cleaned, photographed, packed up, and shipped, that first Hilton job was done. And here's how it worked out financially. After fees, supplies, machine runtime, and everything else, I cleared about $592. And I only had about 2 hours of real hands-on labor in this job. That's the kind of job that Engravings to You is all about. So already with this job, the P3 has already earned back this much. And then things got interesting. After they received their first order, they reached back out. This time, they wanted 150 units, but instead of this 8-inch version, they wanted to change them to just 6 inches. Now this is where the business side gets interesting, because when they asked me to make them smaller, I made a pricing decision. I kept the same price per unit. Now yes, the material cost would have been a little less, and yes, the machine time would have been a little less too. But the labor? Honestly, not all that different. I still had to prep the material, run the job, finish the signs, package them, communicate with the client, and handle fulfillment. So my thinking was, for a client connected to a large hotel like this, it was worth taking the shot. And if they pushed back on price, I figured I could always come down. But was that the right call? Or could that pricing decision have killed the deal? At that same per unit rate, the second order would have been worth $6,750. And now we're talking about a job that could have changed this whole video. They wanted a physical mock-up of a 6-inch version. They offered to pay for it, but I told them I'd send it free of charge. I wanted to leave a good impression and hopefully land that bigger order. So I made it the same day and overnighted it to them, out of my own pocket. That shipping cost me $45.42. So I sent the mock-up, followed up, and waited, and while I was waiting to hear back on that big order, another paid job came in. The next job came from a local marching band director. He wanted awards made for his students. That included 13 small awards, 6 medium awards, and 1 large director's award that I wanted to make a little more special with a woodworking base. I quoted him $30 for the smalls, $40 for the mediums, and $80 for the director's award. That put the total at $710. He got that approved. Then I designed some mock-ups and sent those over. I probably had about an hour tied up in the design work and the file set up before the laser even started. For these, I use 1/4-inch clear cast acrylic. And for this style, I actually remove all of the paper masking before I laser it. That might sound backwards at first, but it'll make sense in a minute. Remember this trick when working with clear acrylic. I put a little piece of blue tape on the acrylic so the machine could find the proper focus automatically. And again, I started making just one first. Used the built-in cameras to place the design exactly where I wanted it, then sent the job. That first piece took about 21 minutes. Once it was done, I took it inside to the sink and scrubbed off all of the white acrylic dust stuck inside the engravings. That matters, because it helps the paint bond better later. Now, once it dried, the surface looked cloudy. And that's because I took the masking off before lasering. But that's okay, because instead of fighting tiny pieces of masking and trying to weed every little detail, I just paint the whole thing. and sand the face back down after. So first, I paint the edges and the engraved areas. Everything gets covered. That's fine. While that was drying, I got the laser started on the Director's Award, because I knew I needed that piece so I could move on to the woodworking base. That one took 26 minutes and 21 seconds. Then I got the larger batches going. Now, obviously, leaving a machine unattended is not something I recommend, especially when cutting acrylic. But I do like that the P3 has cameras you can monitor through the software, plus flame detection and the option for the added fire suppression. So while the laser was running, I used that time to go work on the wood base. And that's another business lesson right there. How do you structure the job so the machine is working while you're doing something else? Because that's how you start improving efficiency. I built the base, cut the grooves, shaped it, sanded it, assembled it, painted it, and got it ready while the P3 kept cutting the rest of the acrylic. Once the black paint on the first test award was dry, I sanded the face with 120 grit. After that, I blow it off with compressed air. That removes all the black paint on the face, removes the clouding, and leaves a nice frosted glass look to the acrylic. So what you're left with is black paint inside the engravings and on the edges. And I really like that frosted glass look. That's why I like this method. It saves me time from tedious masking removal, and I still get a great final look. Spray it with clear satin lacquer, and in only 10 minutes it's dry. From there, it was more of the same process. Clean them, dry them, paint them, sand them back, clean them again, then lacquer. The Director's Award got assembled into the wood base with a little glue in the slots. The rest used the same acrylic stands as the Hilton signs. Once everything was photographed and approved, I packed them up carefully with butcher paper between each piece, and the director came by to pick them up. And again, from a business standpoint, I like this job because it proves something different. Same machine, different material, different customer, different finish, still profitable. On this one, after material, supplies, and machine runtime, I cleared about $633.25. And I had around 4 hours of hands-on labor in it. So now the running total looked like this: $1,225.25 of the $7,497. And while all of this was happening, I was still waiting to hear back from the hotel about that really large order. About 10 days went by with no response, so I sent a follow-up email asking if they received the mock-up and whether they needed anything else from me. Then they replied and asked for an official quote and payment instructions. So I got that over to them right away. And at that point, I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is still alive. Maybe the general manager just has to approve it, and then I'm off to full production mode. I was ready for that job. But while I was waiting on that decision, another local job that was in need of a rush came in. And this one pushed the P3 in a totally different direction. I got a phone call from one of my biggest local clients. He was in a bind. He was opening a new retail store in St. Simons, Georgia for his new clothing line called Caddy. And he needed an outdoor storefront sign by that weekend. He sent me the Pantone colors to match the paint and photos from the installer showing the backer that had already been built for the sign. I sized it up to fit the logo, and this thing was going to be big. The only machine for a job like this is the P3 with the automatic conveyor. Even my larger CO2 lasers couldn't handle this sign. For the sign itself, I created 2 layers that could be glued together to make a total thickness of 1 inch. The front layer had larger plug holes. The back layer had smaller pilot holes that would line up perfectly with the plug holes. I loaded the 2-foot by 8-foot section of material into the P3, used my workbench for the back support, and a stool and a box to support the front. And this is where the project almost went sideways. I thought I had my tabs set right, but once the cut started, the first shape fell through because the tabs were too small. It jammed up the machine. And for a minute, I really thought I had ruined the whole thing. But this is where the cameras saved me. I taped that piece back in, used the cameras to line everything back up, rotated the design, and was able to skip that problem area. That salvaged the job. Now that it's off and running, this whole cut only took about 21 minutes. This time, the tabs held perfectly. Once finished, I carried that piece out to the woodshed and loaded in the second layer, remembering to change the design to the one with just the pilot holes. That one cut great too, and it only took 21 minutes also. Then came the cleanup and assembly. I also cut plugs that would be painted and pressed in later by the installer after the sign was mounted. I cut off all the tabs by hand using a small X-Acto knife. Glued the two layers together with construction adhesive and pinned them all together with some 3/4 inch brad nails. Now the edges didn't line up perfectly. I'm not really sure what caused this, but I figured out a way that I could fix it. I used a router with a flush trim bit to make both layers perfectly match. I used that flush trim bit on both sides. Then in the router, I switched over to a round over bit because paint does not hold well to sharp edges. So I rounded over all the edges on the front side. Then I sanded everything with 120 grit. I had to hand sand a lot of those tight spots where the sander couldn't reach. Then moved on to paint. And honestly, the paint sprayer gave me a fight on this one. It was splattering more than I wanted. And because I was under a time crunch, I really just needed coverage. So I ended up brushing a lot of it out by hand, going back over the edges. And then I had to clean out all the plug holes with a Q-tip. I painted the red flag separately, and you can see I did it with just the brush and it worked out perfectly. And I painted the plugs and I made extras just in case the installer lost any when installing. I was out of time. I had to let the paint dry and see how it came out. The client was coming to pick it up in the morning. The next morning, everything looked good enough to send out. I packed it up with glue, extra paint, and the plugs. The client approved, he liked it a lot. He drove it down to St. Simon's that day. The installer mounted it, and then they sent me a photo of the finished sign in place. From a business standpoint, this one mattered because it showed a totally different side of the P3. Not just for smaller products, not just awards, but a large format commercial sign that I really needed the conveyor for. I charged $750, and I had about 6 hours of hands-on labor in this one. So now our running total looked like this: $1,825 of the $7,497. So what happened with that Hilton order? Well, this is where everything went cold. After I sent the mock-up, followed up, sent over the official quote, and gave them payment instructions, the last thing I heard was that it had been passed along to the general manager for approval. And after that, nothing. So I guess they decided to go a different route. Maybe the price was the issue. Maybe it got stuck in internal approvals. Maybe it just got lost in emails. Maybe someone else got the order. Truth is, I don't know, and honestly, that is a real part of business too. Not every promising lead closes. Not every almost win turns into a win. And sometimes you can do everything right and make a solid product. Respond quickly, send the sample, follow up professionally, and it still doesn't happen. That part doesn't feel great, but it is real. And I think it belongs in this video. Because if we're going to talk about using a machine like this as a business owner, then we also need to talk about the jobs that almost happened. Because one of the biggest values in a machine like this is not just what it has already earned, it is what it makes possible. So let's tally everything up and see how we did. Even without landing the big Hilton hotel order, from the first Hilton QR order after fees and expenses, I made about $592. But I also spent $45.42 overnighting that free sample in hopes of landing the bigger job. So after subtracting that part comes down to about $546.58. From the Marching Band Awards, I made about $633.25. And from the Caddy store sign, I made about $599.75. That brings the total from these three jobs to $1,780. Now, compared to the full setup cost of the machine that I have here, $7,497, that means I still came up about $5,717 short of fully paying it off. But that is still about 25% of the way there. And honestly, from just 3 real customer jobs, I think that's a pretty strong result, especially when you look on the hands-on labor. Across all 3 jobs, I only had about 12 hours of my own labor in them. So blended together, that works out to about $148 per hour of hands-on time. That doesn't mean every job is going to look like that, and it doesn't mean every lead will turn into a win. But what it does show me is this machine can create real opportunities, make money, and for me, that's what matters most. So no, the xTool P3 did not pay for itself in this video. Not even close. But I also don't think that means the challenge failed, because in just 3 jobs, it earned back about a quarter of the full setup cost. It handled repeatable product work, it handled custom acrylic awards, it handled large format commercial signage. And maybe most importantly, if you want a machine like this to make sense as a business tool, it's not just about what the machine can do, it's also about what you can do with it. Your process, your efficiency, your product choices, your pricing, your follow-up, your ability to turn the machine's capability into something people actually want to buy. And when you get that part right, I do think a setup like this can absolutely earn its keep over time. I'd love to know what you think. Out of these 3 jobs, which one do you think made the strongest business case for the P3? Let me know down in the comments. And if you run a laser business, I'd really love to hear what kinds of products paid off your machine the fastest. There's QR codes on the screen for more information on the P3 and links to my other stuff. If this video helped you out, like, subscribe, and leave a comment. As always, I'm Chad from Chad's Custom Creations. Be encouraged, stay inspired, and keep on creating.